Good evening. I'm Jim Hoggan, and I wanted to start by saying that I'm not here speaking as chair of the David Suzuki Foundation, but as the author of a book that I'm writing called The Polluted Public Square. And in this book, I'm on a personal journey to learn from public intellectuals. I travel from Oxford to Harvard to Yale to MIT I had tea with this expert on public trust in the House of Lords dining room. I spent a week with the Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. I traveled to the Himalayas to interview the Dalai Lama. So I've spent 3 years on this journey. Originally, I thought I was writing a book for other people, but I realized as I was going through this that I was actually writing a book for myself. And the book is about this question of public conversations and about the state of public discourse. And the specific question I asked all of these people was, why is it, in spite of all of this scientific evidence from experts in atmospheric, marine, and life sciences, are we doing so little to fix these big environmental problems that we're creating? Why isn't public discourse on the environment more data-driven? Why are we listening to each other shout rather than listening to what the evidence is trying to tell us? One of the first interviews that I did was with a Yale Law School cognitive scientist named Dr. Dan Kahan. And he had part of the answer for me. He said, just as you can pollute the natural environment, you can pollute public conversations. And he said that healthy public discourse is a public good that is every bit as important as the natural environment. That we should be willing to value and protect, consciously protect, the state and the health of public discourse. And that we were, in Canada and the United States, suffering from what he called social pathology. And this kind of healthy public discourse, or this healthy attitude towards public discourse, is certainly something that we're not paying much attention to in Canada these days. In 2012, let me take you back to something that the Conservative government would probably rather we all forgot about. The beginning of 2012, some folks in Canada's oil and gas industry launched a PR campaign with this message: ethical oil is like fair trade coffee. It's like conflict-free diamonds. It's morally superior. In 2012, the oil and gas industry worked closely with the Conservative government to convince Canadians that British Columbians who opposed tankers on the coast of BC were extremists working for American business interests. Now, environmental activists have been polluting the public square for a long time. They've compared the oil sands to heroin. They've called it blood oil. They've called oil companies environmental criminals engaged in crimes against humanity. Now, who would have thought that this level of rhetoric could actually be raised even higher? But it was. Senator Mike Duffy called BC environmental charities un-Canadian. The Minister of the Environment accused them of money laundering. The PMO called them foreign-funded radicals. Senator Don Platt said, where would environmentalists draw the line on who they receive money from? Would they take money from Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Hamas? So in 2012, as Terry Glavin put it, suddenly we had sleeper cells of Ducks Unlimited popping up across Canada. Now, I'm not suggesting equivalency here. that these environmentalists have the evidence of climate change on their side. They're arguing against the inaction from an industry that's in a lot of trouble as the world realizes that their product is changing the climate. And they haven't done a very good job of handling that trouble. I met a guy in Harlem at a coffee shop. His name is Jason Stanley. He writes for the New York Times, and he teaches philosophy of language and a class in democracy and propaganda at Yale. And he said that when oil from Fort McMurray is called ethical oil, or coal from West Virginia is called clean oil, or clean coal, sorry, that it's difficult to have a real discussion about the pros and cons. He explained that these kinds of improbable assertions, where words are misappropriated and the meanings are twisted, are not so much about making substantial claims, but they're about silencing. He called them linguistic strategies for stealing the voices of others. He said, Fox News engages in silencing when it describes itself as fair and balanced to an audience that is perfectly aware that it is neither. The effect is to suggest that there's no such thing as fair and balanced, that there's no possibility of balanced news, only propaganda. Canada's public square is polluted with a toxic form of rhetoric that insinuates that there are no facts, there is no objectivity, and that everyone is trying to manipulate you for their own interests. Our belief in sincerity and objectivity itself is under attack. So when everything's mislabeled and you can't trust anything that anyone says, why bother with the public square? The American linguist Deborah Tannen puts it this way: when you hear a ruckus outside your house at night, you open the window to see what's going on. But if there's a ruckus every night, you close the shutters and ignore it. The Ethical Oil Foreign-Funded Radicals campaign has made Canadians less able to weigh facts honestly, disagree constructively, and think things through collectively. Now, how you clean up the public square, my book is like 120,000 words. And so that's a big question for 7-minute speech. But let me say this: I'm right, you're wrong. Let me tell you what you should think is not a great communication strategy. Moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt told me that, and also said, that doesn't work because we all think we're right. Haidt argues that people are divided by politics and religion, not because some people are good and others are evil, but because our minds were designed for groupish righteousness. Morality binds and blinds us. Our righteous minds were designed by evolution to unite us into teams, divide us against other teams, and blind us to the truth. And Haidt suggests that we step outside the self-righteousness of what he calls our moral matrix, and that we look to the Dalai Lama to see the power of moral humility, and that we take the time to understand the values and worldviews of people that we strongly disagree with. I also interviewed TED Prize winner Karen Armstrong, who developed the Charter for Compassion, and she put it this way: we must speak out against injustice, but not in a way that causes more hatred. She told me, remember what St. Paul said, charity takes no delight in the wrongdoing of others. So my time's up, but I just want to say one more thing. Since the 60s, I've been reading Eastern philosophy and following particularly Zen Buddhism. So a little while ago, David Suzuki and I were lucky enough to spend an afternoon with a famous Zen Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. And he kept saying to David, people don't need to know more about destroying the planet. They already know they're destroying the planet. You need to deal with the despair. So I kept listening to him, and it sounded to me like he was saying that we should go meditate. And so I said, now look, in Canada, Canadians expect the David Suzuki Foundation to speak up on behalf of the environment. You're not saying we shouldn't be activists. It's hard. I've been trying to think of how I could describe the way he looked at me, but it was with this kind of silence and deepness that I can't remember having anyone look at me like that before. So he looked at me and he said, speak the truth, but not to punish. Thank you.